before we go on. Okay, so it takes all of this, it takes all of these years for this approval to get done. So it is very difficult for Raytheon to reject this, right? There are only a couple of suppliers who have been able to provide the material. So therefore, those one or two companies, they can just set their price and NASA has to pay that price because they don't have any other choices because the approval takes so long and there are only a couple of people who can do it. The bargaining power of buyers is the opposite of that. This power is created when the consumer has so many choices that they can easily switch or between the suppliers, right? And they actually are the ones in control. Think about Costco or for me, Sam's, right? They are able to sell us things in bulk for a huge savings because they buy so much, they're getting it for a lower cost. And so they can pass that savings on to us. And then there is the threat of substitutes. And that happens when the consumer is able to access a product with similar benefits or maybe even better benefits, right? And it is pretty easy for them to do so. Years ago, when you needed to get your taxes prepared, you had to set your appointment. You walked into your tax preparer's office with your receipts. You were there all day, and you were in an office, right? Now you can use TurboTax or you can do H&R Block online. You don't have to set an appointment. You don't have to leave your house, right? You can just stay right there and have your and prepare your own taxes, and it costs a lot less, right? So there is that threat, right? That threat of substitutes, because now you don't see, there are not as many tax preparation offices, right? You'll see accountants, but most people, and those are for, larger businesses, but most people just, if it's something small, they do it themselves online, right? And it walks you right through. It's pretty easy. Business intelligence is another tool that is used in business acumen. And business intelligence is the process and the activities that convert raw data into information that an organization can use to make strategic decisions, right? So business intelligence helps the organization to be competitive, helps it to retain its competitive advantage. And it helps that organization to see where maybe there are bottlenecks or where they are lacking, right? And they can address those things. So it's more like the basics information is like raw material, a whole lot of pieces of information that come together. And it gives that company a full picture of like who their customer avatar is, what they are aiming for, what their customer wants, like where they are lacking, what they are not providing for that customer. When you check into a hotel, while you are reserving that hotel, if you're reserving online, they get information from you. They ask you questions, and they're subtle questions, but from those questions, if they get enough of those answers, they can create their customer avatar. So when they're asking you those things like, what is the occupancy? Are you traveling for business or is it for pleasure? They ask you about your home address. Sometimes they even ask you your age and the age of the people or the children that are traveling with you, right? So that is basic information that they are subtly gathering from you. It doesn't really inconvenience you much to answer these questions. And at this point, it feels like just a part of the reservation experience, right? It just feels like they're asking these questions as a part of making the reservation. It's not a very big deal, but they are gathering that information to put it all together so that they know who their customer avatar is. And they can create campaigns that target that audience. And they can offer discounts to that audience, things that they know are going to appeal to that market. So that's how business intelligence is used. Inside of the organization, it is used to drive our goals. So maybe the organization wants to increase production time, right? Let's say the production manager says, hey, we want to increase our production time by 15%. we can look into each part of the organization and we can identify, what are our bottlenecks, or how can we increase efficiency? How can we cut some of these processes out? And that's how we use that intel in our organizations. We use it to create value. So the business intelligence system has three parts. There is data gathering, there is data warehousing, and then there is reporting and query. So data gathering is the compiling of that data, right? So it, just putting it all together in one place. Data warehousing is the storing of the data, and then query and reporting, it is what delivers, the information to you. A lot of organizations have an ERP system. ERP is an enterprise resource planning system. And the ERP translates data from one part of the organization so that every function has access and every function can use that information for decision making. So let's see. I just want to make a quick note, guys. I believe that this recording is going to, right? So you'll have two recordings there because it looks like a connection was lost and I had to start recording again. So it should be two parts. So if you see a shorter one, don't get alarmed. Just say, hey, listen, this is the second part. I think I have to send an email to everybody to let them know. All right, so let's move on to business case. A business case is used to convince the decision makers or to justify some kind of action that we see value in. If you think that, hey, this organization needs a new training program, right? I know that it is going to help the employees. It's going to decrease their training time if we were to just get a more intuitive system. You're going to have to go to the decision makers and convince them to do away with the old training program, something that they may not even see as a problem and they don't see it's worth investing more money into, right? If people aren't complaining and the training is still being done, why then would I invest in something that I don't see a need for, right? So they have to know why they should invest. What is the problem with the old one? How is what you are introducing going to increase value and save us money or make us more efficient, right? So that's where you create your business case. And there are four major steps to a business case. You have your statement of need. There is the recommendation of solution. There is the associated risk. And then obviously the big one is cost, right? So the statement of need, it tells us why we have a problem, right? Like, why isn't what we're doing working? What is the issue? Then the recommendation tells the decision maker how the problem can be fixed or how we can implement this improvement. Next is identifying anything that might get in the way of the plan, right? So what are some of the risks that are out there? And if the risks actually do present themselves, how would we overcome those risks? And then the last one, of course, is the cost. You have to tell them how are we going to get these things paid for, what it's going to cost the organization, and then what is the time frame. That's also important, right? So the business case, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. You just have to know like the different, you have to know the different pieces of the business case, but they're pretty straightforward. All right, very good. Very good. Let's keep things moving here. Oh yeah, we're moving on to consultation. We're making excellent time. Okay, so when any part of the organization is not operating at what we consider to be optimal, we as the HR professionals must act as the consultants. right? So we have to work alongside the stakeholders. We have to offer them guidance. We have to give them some direction so that we can determine the cause of the issue and try to eradicate that. To identify the problem, the first thing we have to do is identify what we consider to be optimal, right? As an organization, what is the best state for us? And it could be by benchmarking, like we could benchmark it against best practices. We could benchmark it against a time where we were, at our very best. We could benchmark it against a company that we aspire to be, right? So basically, optimal is best practice or where we want to be. The difference between what should be happening and what is actually happening is the gap that we're trying to overcome. And overcoming that gap requires the organization to make changes, and those unfold within the consultation model. Once that gap is identified, we have to work to find the source of that gap. And then after finding the problem, the next step is to implement a solution. Now, of course, you know that before you implement anything, you have to have something to implement. So although it is not mentioned here in the consultation model, you know that before you implement something, you first have to design it, right? You can't make any changes. You can't implement something unless you have a plan to do it. So you have to determine how the solution is going to come together, how it's going to affect the organization, and you have to plan for those effects. That kind of unfolds within the implementation. All right. Next, solutions. So solutions have to overcome the problem. To figure out whether or not the problem has been overcome, we use measuring tools. So this is where we start, displaying our strategic capacity. This is when we use ROIs and we use cost benefit analysis, and we use KPIs, right? These are the things that tell us if the organization is seeing a return on whatever we've been able to convince that the solution is, right? Whatever we've implemented, we want to make sure that it is improving production. And then the final stage is to embed the changes so that the organization maintains its optimal state. So HR professionals, we are the, change champions, right? And we have to encourage the employees. I mean, not just employees, we have to encourage all the stakeholders. So, because sometimes it's not just the employees, sometimes it's the leaders of the organization, sometimes it's governmental agents, sometimes it's regulatory agencies. So anybody who has a stake, right? We have to make sure that they are informed and they understand, what's going on. Lewin's change model and Cotter's change model are at the center of the change management process. Lewin's model has 3 phases. Now, there are other change management models, but Lewin is kind of like the foundation. Some of the other change management models might expand on what Lewin says. Some of them restrict some of the things that Lewin says, change it a little bit, but Lewin's is the foundation, and especially for short-term change, like something that's going to change very quickly, right? So Lewin's model has 3 phases. It is unfreezing, then there is change, and then there is refreezing, right? So according to Lewin, the first step in change is creating the perception that a change is needed. So you should be getting the support of the organization's leaders. You should be managing their concerns, right? In this first phase. In the second phase, this is actually the action part, right? So this is the change. You need to be moving in the direction of the change that you're trying to create. So this is the point where you bring the employees in, and now you're trying to fill their concerns and you're answering their questions. And then the final step is refreezing. This is the most important piece, because this is the point that you are trying to make sure that you've gone through this whole process and people don't revert, right? So this is the point where you're making sure that everything stick. You know how difficult change is. If you've been on the other end of change, it's hard. And a lot of times when it gets difficult, people tend to revert back to their old ways. Right. So refreezing is making sure that that does not happen. You are solidifying the change as the new status quo. And this is the way that things are done. This is not just, a temporary change that the organization is making. Very important piece, because if you don't refreeze, you have some people doing it one way, some people doing it another way. And then you may have people doing it different ways at different times, which is what happens in a lot of organizations if you don't have some barriers. Okay. Guys, can I 1 second? I'm gonna just take one sip of water. I'm so sorry for the pause. Okay, now is Cotter's version. You can see it has more steps, so it's a little bit more extended than Lewin's model. Again, because we know that Lewin's is kind of the foundation, it is the mainstay. We can see some of the same elements from Lewin's model in Cotter's model. Cotter's model is best when the change is going to take a while, right? So Lewin's model is when we have to have a change pretty quickly. It's going to happen pretty quickly, but Cotter's is when the change, it may take a few years, right? And you're going to have to reset expectations. You're going to have to come back and repeat some steps, right? So Cotter's change model is a little bit more drawn out, but again, still has some of the same elements. So starting with the first step, which is establishing the urgency, making sure that everybody knows that a change is needed. If people don't understand the necessity for the change, then they are not going to buy into the change, right? And so you're just going to have more resistant people, and it's harder to get people to take any steps toward the change. So that's the first piece in any change management model. You have to make sure that people understand that the change is necessary and it is going to benefit them. And on the other side, they are going to be better for the change. And then after that, you form a coalition, right? So put together your team of change champions, the people who are going to advocate for the change, the ones that are going to be out there talking up the change, right? Those are that's your coalition or your change champions. Next, present a clear vision of what you're moving to accomplish, right? People have to know what is going to be on the other side in order for them to buy in and want to be a part. Right, so that's very important. The fourth thing is you have to make sure that your vision is known. So again, tell the people what they can expect from your vision and how it is going to benefit them. Then you really start taking action on, taking steps in their change. So this is where some people can be discouraged, right, by obstacles. So this is where you as an HR professional, you are using your long-term vision. You are looking ahead. You're seeing what those obstacles may be, and you are removing those things. You are thinking, like this change may require people to have to work overtime. People are going to be rebellious, right? They're not going to want to, work this overtime. How can I ensure that doesn't happen? Can I talk to the supervisors and get guaranteed that people won't have to work overtime, and they lower their production standards so that while people are ramping up, they can, still work their regular schedule. So as HR, you have to look ahead, see what the obstacles may be, and then you have to remove those obstacles so that it is not difficult for people to buy into your change, right? And to keep going with that change. All right. Then you create short-term wins. Okay. So remember, I told you Cotter's model is best when you have a long-term change that's necessary. So it's going to take a while, right? So you have to, along the way, create some short-term wins. If I know that, for example, I need to hire 1,200 people, well, I'm not going to wait to celebrate the 1,200. I'm going to celebrate at 100. Then we'll celebrate at 250, then 500, right? So that people know like they're like something is happening. And then you just build on that change. So that's easy. If you lose steam, you just need to revisit any step. You need to keep going, keep building that steam, repeating those steps, and you until you get to your final step. And that is what you might recognize, solidifying that change, right? So that's when you are anchoring that change into the organization. So maybe you need to create new standard operating procedures. Maybe you need to create a new bonus structure, a new reward structure, right? Whatever it is that you can do to ensure that the change becomes a part of the culture, right? And people are not just looking at it as just another change. Okay. All right, 7S model. This one helps us to determine how efficiency can be achieved in an organization. It tracks the impact of change in 7 different areas. These 7 areas all happen to start with an S, right? And so that's why we get the 7S model. So we have, I'll leave strategy for last. So we'll start here at structure. So we have structure, then there are systems, there's staff, there's style, there's skill, there's shared values, all being driven by our strategy. All right, so strategy is what we're trying to get to based on our shared values. Okay, so let's look at, I think I'll start with shared values. All right, so shared values are the mission and the strategy. All of these are the things that form the organization's foundation. The shared values is what help the stakeholders to understand what the company is working toward. From these shared values comes our strategy, right? The strategy is the organization's plan of action. This is the way that the organization is going to reach the goals established in our shared values. All right. Then we have to create a structure that supports this strategy. The structure is the way that the organization is set up. So it is like the chain of command. It is the span of control. It is whether or not we are product organization, are we functional, right? So how we are set to achieve this strategy based on the goals within these shared values. And then there are the systems, right? So the systems is the infrastructure of the organization. These are like the processes that we use. Then there is the staff. So this is the talent within the organization, the human resource of the organization. The style is the company's culture. So this is where like our code of conduct come from. This is where our handbook comes from, our policies, our rules of engagement, all the kinds of things that come together to make the culture. And then there is the skill. So of course, this is like the capabilities of the staff within the organization, right? So this is the competencies, the knowledge that they have, all unfold with under the skills, right? So shared value, this establishes the goal. The strategy tells us how we are going to reach these goals. And then everything else is a support for this strategy, right? Any questions on the 7S model? Any questions? Okay, well, let's get on then. Let's keep it going. Now we're going to talk about some group decision-making tools, which is important in consultation because sometimes we have to make a decision about what is best to move forward, right? How it is best to move forward. So the first one we're going to talk about is the SWOT analysis, which you may be familiar with because like if you've joined any one of my classes, then we've talked about the SWOT analysis a couple of times. SWOT is an acronym, stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats. Strengths and weaknesses are internal factors. So strengths are things that the organization does well. Weaknesses are the things that the organization needs to improve upon. Fortunately, they are internal. So that means we do have the ability to improve upon our weaknesses. That means that we do have the authority to leverage our strengths because we are in control of these things. They are internal. Now, opportunities and threats are external. These are things that are out of our control. So if an opportunity exists, right, all we can do is take advantage of the opportunity, but we haven't created the opportunity. Therefore, the opportunity can be withdrawn, and there's nothing that we can do about it at that point, right? But while it's there, we can take advantage of it. Then there are threats, also out of our control because they are external, right? If something is threatening us, all we can do is respond to the threat. Unfortunately, we can't withdraw the threat because we did not create the threat. So all we can do is develop processes, develop systems, develop our infrastructure to respond to the threat while it is still present, right? And then next is the SOAR analysis. The SOAR analysis is another strategic tool, and it is similar to the SWOT analysis. But the SOAR analysis focuses on strengths, right? And using those strengths to take advantage of the available opportunities. SOAR is also an acronym, but it stands for strengths, opportunities. Now you'll see the strengths and opportunities are very similar to the strengths and opportunities in the SWOT analysis, in that they exist in the same way, right? So your aspirations is the A, and then results. The strengths and opportunities are an assessment of the current situation. And then the aspirations and the results, these focus on the future. Now, your strengths and your aspirations, those are internal, just like in the SWOT analysis, the strengths are internal, right? But your opportunities and results are external, just like in the SWOT analysis, the opportunities are external. I know sometimes I get questions, afterward asking why the results would be external, because if you think about it, we do contribute to the results that we get, but we are not the only factors, right? We can't achieve the results alone. We have vendors, we have suppliers, we have customers. All of them have an influence on whether or not we achieve our results, right? So if one of our aspirations is to be the biggest toy retailer in the world, we cannot reach that final result without the customers buying, right? Or without our vendors coming through and doing what they're supposed to do. So our strengths, we have control of. What we aspire to do is also under our control. But the results of those aspirations are partly dependent on other people. And the opportunities are, obviously outside factors, because opportunities exist. All we can do is, take advantage of those. So the SOAR analysis helps the organization to identify their strengths. These are the things that it can leverage to take advantage of opportunities when they present. That is going to help in the achievement of the aspirations. And then the results are how we measure whether we have achieved those aspirations. Okay. A force field analysis analyzes forces favoring or either opposing a change. So remember, in consultation, right? Remember what happens. Change unfolds within that consultation model. But before we start implementing changes, this is a part of the design. Before we start implementing changes, we have to evaluate these changes. We have to analyze these changes to ensure that they are going to be favorable for our organization, right? So imagine you have a group that is evaluating a change to a new learning management system. That group is going to come together. They would identify the driving forces. Now, the driving forces are the things that are favorable or the reasons that we should enact this new learning management system. Maybe the driving forces are it's going to increase the skill of the employees. Maybe it is going to engage the employees. Maybe it's just more efficient for the organization, right? So those are all driving forces. Next, they are going to identify the restraining forces. So these are the unfavorable reasons that they may decide, hey, maybe this learning management system is not the best idea. So maybe one reason is that it could slow down production at the start, right? And we don't want to slow down production. We're just getting going. Maybe some people might be resistant to the change, and we're worried about employee engagement issues, or maybe it's just going to be costly and we're trying to save money, right? So those are the reasons that we should not employ the learning management system. Then the group is going to come together. They're going to score each one of these driving forces or either restraining forces by the likelihood that it's going to happen and the impact if it were to happen. Right. So in our example, we maybe assign the driving force of skill increase. Maybe we give that an 8. Employee engagement, well, maybe we give that a 7. Maybe the restraining forces, maybe we score them as 9s or 10s, right? Then the group would evaluate the ratings and determine whether the change is going to be positive or negative based on that scoring. So while initially, all the things that we've said, it's going to increase skill, it's going to engage employees, right? You think those are good things. We want that. But if we assign it 7 and 8, but the restraining forces, we assign 9s and 10, then obviously the restraining forces win, right? So even though the idea might sound good when we put it on paper and we put practicality with it, then it may not be as good as we thought. And so that's why the force field analysis is a really good analysis tool for evaluating decisions, right? If you're being truthful. So you have to be objective about it. Next is the cost benefit analysis. So cost benefit analysis helps us to determine the benefit of an action that we are about to take. So once we purchase something, it becomes tangible and we spend money on it, we use a return, an ROI, right? Return on investment. You probably recognize it most as ROI. But before we purchase something, and it is an idea, or if it is something that we can't purchase and it is an action that we are going to take, then we use the cost benefit analysis. So the cost benefit analysis and the ROI are similar things. It's just beyond the cost benefit analysis. Once we actually purchase something, then it morphs into an ROI, because at that point we spend money. But predictively, like when we're trying to evaluate something predictively, we use the cost benefit analysis because there is no return at that point because we haven't spent any money, right? So cost benefit analysis measures the benefit of an action, or either measures the benefit of us spending money predictively, right? We haven't yet spent the money. Next is the multi-criteria decision-making tool. And this helps us like as a team, because these are group decision-making tools that we're talking about, right, in terms of consultation. So it helps the team to determine the characteristics of a successful decision. Maybe you would consider like deadlines, risk, cost, like the likelihood that you will be successful in something. That's another consideration. So you have this matrix and you then score each alternative and you compare the results, right? So for example, if you went into a cell phone store and you're going to buy a new cell phone And the criteria that you're considering is price, maybe what's important these storage space, maybe um color is important, size maybe, right? And the weight is 25% to all of these criteria, because all of these things are equally important to you. The salesperson can then show you a stack of phones and you can evaluate them based on all of the criteria that you get. So maybe one of them meets two of your criteria. One might meet all four, another might meet three. And you can also assign like different weights to each criteria if something is more important to you. Like if the price is more important to you, then you'll say 40, I need to assign it 40%. And the other three will only get 20%. So first things first, Mr. Salesperson, bring me the phones that are within this price. This is going to help you to narrow down those phones, right? And then you may say, okay, now all of these are within the price. Let's look at the ones with the most storage space. All right, these have the sports storage space that I'm looking for, but these have the most storage space. So that helps me to narrow it down even more. Now, I am sure that I want a blue phone, right? So that's going to help me to narrow it down even more. The ones that you can, are blue. All right, so all of these tools are helpful when we are consulting with the organization, because hopefully we are working as collaborators, right? We have a seat at the table. We are working with the leadership team, and we can use these tools to show data, right? This is objective, right? We can show this in black and white, right? So these tools are very important to us. Do we have any questions on any one of these tools? Okay, very good. Let's go ahead and good thing you don't have. Well, Kathy had a question, and I believe I'm going to answer in just a minute, Kathy. All right, so let's move on, because we have some one-liners here that are going to help us to determine when each tool is best. Okay. All right, so let's look at number one. I'm going to drop your answer in the chat, and I will be evaluating the answers. All right. Number one says, a group of innovative entrepreneurs meet to identify opportunities for expansion. A group of innovative entrepreneurs meet to identify opportunities for expansion. Which is the best tool? All right, we have a combination. We have SWOT and SOAR analysis. All right, so this one is actually a SOAR analysis, because what are we looking for? We are looking toward the future. We are looking for opportunities for expansion. So this goes to our aspirations, what we are trying to achieve later. A SWOT analysis tells us what is happening around us right now, like what is happening today that might threaten our organization. The SOAR analysis looks toward the future, right? What are the opportunities out there that might help us to achieve what we are aspiring to do for the future? So these people are meeting to look for future opportunities. Okay. All right, let's go to the next one. Leaders of a large coffee company meet to outline the company's strategic position. Leaders of a large coffee company meet to outline the company's strategic position. Okay, very good. This one is a SWOT analysis, right? Because the strategic position is what is happening right now, right? How do we determine our strategic position? What are the strengths that we have? What are the weaknesses that we have? What are the opportunities that we have? What are the threats that are out there, right? And based on that, we can determine what our competitive advantage should be, right? We know that we do customer service really, really well. So maybe we should have a differentiation focus, right? We know that we have the lowest cost, right? So maybe we should have a cost leadership, right? So where we are right now is going to help us to determine what our strategic position is, whether we are leaders, whether we have some problems that we need to address. All right. So I'm looking specifically for Kathy's answer because I want to see, Kathy, if this answers your question. Well, I can't find your answer, Kathy. So just let me know in the chat. And I'll be looking for it, whether or not this answers your question. Okay, very good. Let's go to the next one. A company increases its insurance spousal surcharge and assesses the impact on employee premiums. A company increases its insurance spousal surcharge and assesses the impact on employee premiums. Okay, everybody chose cost benefit analysis for this one. Cost benefit analysis is the correct answer. Great job. Next, HR must determine the risk and advantages of a new onboarding system. Okay, we have force field analysis, but then we have some multi-criteria decision analysis. Okay, so let's look at this one. HR has to determine risk. What are those risks? Could those possibly be restraining factors, right? Because if something is a risk, then it will restrain us from taking on whatever we want to take on. And then advantages. Advantages are driving factors, right? So what are the restraining and what are the driving factors of taking on this new onboarding system, right? So this is a force field analysis. All right, let's look at our next one. A company needs to buy office furniture within a strict budget and with a company that offers delivery and setup. Okay, this one is a multi-criteria analysis, and I want somebody to tell me, did you just choose that because it's the last one, or did you actually know the answer to this? Okay, or did you just choose it because it's the only thing left? But this is multi-criteria decision analysis, all right, because this company has multiple criteria. So the first criteria is it has to be within a budget. The company, after they find furniture within the budget, the next criteria is they need a company that offers delivery, right? So that's going to narrow down their choices. First, the budget is going to narrow down their choices. Then we need a company that delivers. That's going to narrow down their choices. After they find a company within budget that also offers delivery, now they're going to need a company that sets up. So that also is going to limit their choices, right? So these are the criteria that the company needs to work within. So this is why this one is multi-criteria decision analysis. Okay. Very good, people. Very good. Very good. All right. Let's keep it right going. Let's keep things going here. We are, and this is going to mark the end of the competencies, and we're going to be moving into the knowledge domains at that point. So yay, we're getting there. Okay, it is imperative that decisions made by HR professionals are based in fact and evidence, right? We know how we are always, even in our roles at work, we are always trying to ensure that we are making objective decisions. So these 6 steps in the decision-making process ensure that HR professionals are taking an objective approach to problem solving and decision-making. Each step in this process contributes to decision-making that should drive the organization's value. The first step in the decision-making process is to ask a question that you can later answer through research, right? Next, The data has to be acquired. You have to acquire it through a reputable resource. The information that you gather needs to be relevant to the question that was raised in step one, right? The data that you gathered also has to be appraised, right? You want to make sure that it is relevant to the problem that you're addressing. For example, if the problem that you're addressing pertains to health and wellness, it's not going to make much sense for you to go gather information from an architectural guide, right? So you want to make sure that that information comes from a source that supports nutrition or medicine, because that's what you're evaluating. The next step is to aggregate the data. And aggregation is really just compiling it. More, um, more not just compiling, like organizing it, right? Putting it in a way that it can be read and you can get points from it, that are, extract things from it that make sense, that you can make decisions from. And then after that information has been aggregated, the next step is to apply what you have learned, right? Because the point is to create a solution. So based on all of this objectivity, you can apply a solution, right? So if the data that's being gathered is to try to present a business case, or you're trying to influence a decision, this is the step where you start to bring everything together, right? And then your final step is to assess the actions that have been taken, because you want to make sure that whatever actions you've taken have had the intended effect, and you're not just doing this for nothing, right? So very important. Next, we're going to talk about our sources, right? So where are we getting this information from to go through our evidence-based decision-making process? Data is the only way to make evidence-based decisions. But data is only as good as the source that you are extracting it from. And there are two kinds of data. So you have quantitative data, and then you have qualitative data. Your quantitative data is data that can be counted, or it can be measured. These things you can answer explicit questions about, right? So if somebody asks you how many, you can say 5. If they ask you how much, you can say $29.97, right? If they say how often, you can say bi-weekly. These are things that are based in numerical finding. Qualitative data is data that cannot be quantified. It is more subjective, right? Such as behaviors or opinions or concepts, right? So I've listed both your qualitative data sources as well as your quantitative data sources, right? Qualitative data sources are normally the data sources that we get from people, right? And we call these things qualitative because even though they are data, it doesn't mean that we don't trust the data, right? The information that we get from people, or it's qualitative because people have different perspectives. If you go outside right now and there's a car accident, and you see a car accident happening in front of your home, then your perspective of the car accident could be 100% fact, but it is only from the perspective and the vantage point of your house. Your neighbor's vantage point is different, so their perspective is going to be different. Both of those perspectives are true, but based on where you are, you have a different vantage point, right? And so that's why this data is qualitative, right? It is not objective because it can't relatively answer objective questions. Like, it can't really answer how many, how much, what, right? What time, when you're using objective data. Now, if I ask both of you and your neighbor, what time the accident happened, both of y'all are going to say it happened at 1:49 p.m. Right? That's objective. And I'm going to get the same information from both people, no matter, what I asked, right? It happened at the time that it happened. But if I ask you what happened, I might get a different story depending on your vantage point, right? So that's why qualitative is qualitative, and then quantitative is quantitative. Okay. Let's see. That brings us to, we're still in analytical aptitude, statistical analysis. Sometimes statistical analysis can have pitfalls, right? And we call those statistical errors, right? So these errors or these biases occur in sampling, which results in either a selection error, a response error, a performance error, or a measurement error, right? A sampling extracts a small representation from a larger population. Sometimes if there's a very large population, the data is going to be easier for us to manipulate if we break it down into a smaller sample. Or it just could be logistically, it could just be easier for us to manipulate the data that way. One downfall of sampling is that it might lead to skewed information. So if you're not including enough people to ensure that your representation is fair, you may have some skewed data. Imagine if you worked in a manufacturing facility and you're conducting the survey on the employee's benefits preference. If you have 5,000 employees with a makeup of executive, entry level, and then you have hourly, right? And they are all equally split. Now, if you took a random sample and 65% of the participants were executives, then that would mean that your sample is not a true reflection of the workforce because they are equally split, right? And so since the executives are disproportionately represented, then you might get an error, right? Because executives are going to want something different from benefits than, you know, like an hourly employee, right? So your sampling wouldn't be reflective, so your data wouldn't be as trustworthy. So if an error happened in selection, maybe it is because the people participating aren't being randomly chosen, right? So for example, if I wanted to test a new HRIS system, but I only asked the members of HR to participate, then that might create a selection bias, right? HR, they have industry experience. They can navigate HRIS systems better. They know what buttons to, you know, go through. They know generally where things are housed. But other end users, they may not have that experience, right? So they may report something completely different than someone with an HR background. A response error is the opposite of the selection error. Right? So a response error happens when the invitation to join is extended, and it is representative of the population, but the people who accept the invitation don't represent the population. So if everybody in the organization was invited to test the new HRIS system, but only the HR employees were excited and they were the only ones who responded, right? Then we have a response error. Next is the performance error. And that happens when the people alter their behavior because they know they're being studied. Right. And you know that you know how that happens sometimes. And then the measurement error is an error that happens when the evaluator isn't assessing correctly. Now, maybe they're not assessing correctly because they don't know how. Maybe it's on purpose. We don't know. Either way, you know, it creates an error. Okay. All right. Data interpretation is the use of different analytical methods to review, you know, data that we have and then try to get to a relevant conclusion based on that. So there are different kinds of data analysis tools. The first one is a ratio analysis, and your ratio analysis compares data to gain insight about business performance, right? So if I started, let's say I started with $10 in January and I lost $5, right? My loss ratio for that period is 50%. A trend analysis is, you know, kind of like it sounds, it studies trends, right? It looks for, you know, trends by collecting information from multiple time periods. And then we plot that information on a horizontal line to help us to make decisions. The regression analysis tries to determine how strongly related one dependent variable is to a series of changing variables. And these are what we call the independent variables. Okay, now your dependent variable is the thing that we focus on. This is what is going to take impact. So when we are performing the regression analysis, maybe the dependent variable may be our employees, right? The employees take the impact of the independent variables, whatever it is we are introducing to the employees. So maybe we say, I want to know what a different bonus structure, right? Will that motivate the employees to work harder? The employees are still the dependent variables. The new bonus structure is the independent variable. And I may say, I want to experiment with the employees' training schedule. I'm going to see if I put them on a new training schedule, how that will impact, right? Again, the employees are the dependents, and what we are introducing is the independent variables, right? So the independent variables are the things that may or may not affect the dependent variable. That's what we're trying to determine. So we introduce those kind of things so that we can study and we can figure out what the best course of action is. Next is the root cause analysis. And the root cause analysis is the core issue that sets in motion circumstances that lead to a problem. If you go into your, organization right now and you fall down, right? That is the problem. The problem is you have fallen, but there is a root cause of that fall. So is it water on the floor? If there's water on the floor, is there a machine or something that's broken? You guys have a hole in your roof, right? What is the root cause of this water on the floor that's causing you to fall, right? Or maybe, are you sick or something? Where's your shoe untied? If your shoe is untied, does it keep coming untied? Does it mean your shoe is too big or too small or something? Right? So the root cause is the core issue that leads to the problem that we see. The variance analysis is the investigation into the cause of deviations from what we consider to be a set standard. So if I'm planning a birthday party and my budget is $5,000, but I spend $6,000, then I can perform a variance analysis so I can figure out what is the deviation, right? So if I went through my budget and I know that everything was supposed to meet the budget, but in the end it cost $6,000, what happened? Right? So I do the variance analysis and I say, at the last minute, the DJ told me that if it's raining outside, he charges an extra $1,000. So next year when I'm planning, or whenever I'm next getting that DJ, I can account for that variance. And then the what if analysis also could be called a simulation. This is a change of variables to see how those changes will affect the outcome. So what if I were to do something than what I am already doing? What difference would that make? Okay. All right. Very, very good. We are winding things down, guys. We are made it through our competencies, and now knowledge domains. And of course, we are starting in the people book. All right. We are going to start with HR strategy, which is a part of the people book. And this is very important for people who are taking the senior level exam. HR strategy is important for all of us, but especially the people who are taking senior level exam, because a lot of the questions come here because HR strategy really drills down into how HR offers value to the organization, right? Which is through strategy. Every organization has a strategic plan. It is what guides the decisions. It is what helps that organization to fulfill its strategic goals, right? It is what pushes the mission of the organization. HR's role in executing the plan is to make sure that we are integrating human resource management strategies in our HR systems to achieve the overall vision of the organization. All right, so remember this. If you don't remember anything else, and we'll talk more about this in the situational judgment workshop, but for today, I want you to put this in your memory. HR's value is shown by the level of strategy that it can offer to the organization. Because the more strategic we are, the higher level our guidance is, right? So when the organization is considering its strategic direction, it is our job to advise them on the logistics of that direction. It is our job to advise them on the advantages that are out there, the opportunities, right? It is our job to advise them, like, what are the threats that are there? What are the weaknesses that we would need to overcome? Right. So it is, we have a hard job. And the more strategic we are, the more we offer to the organization. Right. So it's a big piece of the puzzle. Most things in HR have a process. And most processes start with some kind of information gathering, right? So the strategic planning process has 4 components. It is formulation, which is basically just analyzation or information gathering. Then there is development, there is implementation, and then evaluation. Right? So formulation is what helps us to understand, like, where we are right now. So what is the current state of affairs? Where are we starting from? And what are the advantages? What are the disadvantages of this starting point? Development helps us to determine where we need to go, right? So it is taking what we learned in the formulation or what we learned in our information gathering and constructing a plan based on what we now know. Implementation is putting that plan into action, right? Obviously, right? You implement something. So you actually start doing the work that is, associated with the plan that we've laid out. So you're allocating resources, you are identifying each person's role, you are motivating the employees, you are determining what the motivational tactics are, all those things. And then finally, evaluation. So that's the point where you determine, like, has all this work been worth it, right? Have I done a good job in realizing this strategic plan? Okay. Okay, so we're going to break down each step here. We're going to start first with step 1, that is formulation. And in formulation, remember, it is information gathering, right? Or some kind of analysis. That's always the first step. When you analyze, you use environmental scanning tools. So we are using our SWOT analysis and the PESTLE analysis, right? So we use the SWOT to identify internal threats and opportunities, right? Strengths and weaknesses as well. We use this SWOT analysis. The strengths and weaknesses, these are the internal factors that we can control, just like we talked about. The opportunities and threats, these are the external factors. These are out of our control. All right. So strengths, weaknesses, we can do something about them. Opportunities and threats, we cannot do anything about them. We can only respond to them or take advantage of them. The PESTLE analysis is another tool, and it is an acronym. It stands for political, economical, sociological. Sometimes you'll see this as social, cultural as well. So I just put social there, but however you see it, you'll know what it is. Then technological, legal, and environmental. Now, here's another thing I want to point out. Sometimes when you see the PESTLE analysis, you'll see the last E and the L inverted, right? So it'll be spelled PESTEL. Doesn't matter how it's spelled, it's still the same thing, right? So your political factors could be like government stability. It could be, the amount of trade regulation. Economical factors may be labor cost. It could be unemployment rates. Social factors might be the education of the people. It could be the population itself. Technological, maybe the ability to connect to the internet or the level of technology that's available. Legal, anything to do with the law. And then we have environmental factors. So those are things that have to do with the environment. So maybe pollution is a factor, or maybe global warming is a factor, right? Anything that has to do with the environment. A growth share matrix is a visual assessment of where an organization holds the most value, right? Market share is the percentage of the total revenue or the total sales in a market that a company's business has, right? For example, cell phone service is a market. A company like C Spire, maybe they use a growth share matrix, right? They're trying to determine how many people subscribe to their service in comparison to the total number of cell phone subscribers in the entire market. So if the market share is, let's just use a small number, right? So let's say that the market share is 10 people, right? And 4 of the 10 subscribe to C Spire, then C Spire's market share is 40%, right? So that's a pretty good market share if you're C Spire, right? So we use this growth share matrix to help us to understand how much of our business, how much market share our business is taking up, and then like how much we are growing, right? So how much money are we producing? Because that's our market share. And then how much are we growing, right? How much more market share can we take, right? And so each one of those areas is plotted in one of the 4 positions on the matrix. And that's why it's called the growth, how much we're growing, share, how much share we have, and plus this is a matrix, right? So every area has a name, right? The first one is let's start with the one we don't want first, and we'll work our way up. Okay, so the first one is a dog. Sometimes you'll see this as a pet as well, but we call it a dog. All right, so dogs have a low market share and they have a low growth rate. So they are not making money because they have a low market share. And also we don't see them growing. So they won't be making any money in the future, right? So usually we want to get rid of the dogs because they're not making us any money. All right. Next is a question mark. So question marks are an area that may be growing, but they're not necessarily generating a lot of revenue, right? Because they have a low market share. So because they have a high growth market, which means they are growing, there's a possibility that they will take over more market share and maybe they will make us more money, but we don't know, right? So they are question marks because they're not making money right now, but they are growing. And then we have our stars. So stars they have a high market share, which means they are making a lot of money because they, have taken over a lot of the market. Plus, they have a high growth. So they are growing and they are making us money currently. Then we have our cash cows, right? So cash cows have loyal customers. They have a high market share. People keep coming back. So they are making money, right? But they are not growing, right? So they are generating more revenue than resources that they consume. So a lot of times we use these to fund new business ventures, or sometimes we'll sink money from this cash cow because they have a high market share. So they're making money. So sometimes we'll take the money from the cash cow, we'll put it into the question mark to see if it's going to, make a difference, if it's going to jumpstart this question mark and help it to make us money, right? But the cash cows, aren't growing, right? So market growth is stagnant, but it's making money. So let's see. Oh, gotcha. Yes. Okay, perfect. That's just a little side conversation. I thought it was a question. Okay, so that brings us to plan development. Plan development is where the roadmap to success is developed. Right? So the organization's business strategy is defined here. How the organization is going to create value for the customer is defined here. Because in order for an organization to retain its competitive edge, it has to be prepared to respond to its customers, because the customers are the market, right? The people who buy, that is your market. So you have to respond to your market while taking more share of that market. So the organization always has to be analyzing the market. You have to be making sure that you are, identifying changes and you react to those changes. That is what we call an external change. Now, in some instances, you may have to make internal changes, right? You may have to upgrade your equipment, or you may have to hire more specialized talent. Whatever it is, you have to make sure that you can respond to your market in order for you to remain competitive. In order to construct an effective plan, a company has to determine what its competitive advantage will be, or how it is going to create value for the customers. Cost leadership and differentiation both target the entire market, right? So that means that if your organization has one of cost leadership or differentiation, then they are trying to target the entire market. Their strategy is to be the best at cost or the best at leadership compared to every other organization who performs that same service or sells that same product. The cost leadership strategy is to provide the lowest cost to consumers as compared to other companies in that market. Obviously, while you're still offering something that people are going to want to continue to buy. The differentiation strategy is to set the company apart based on some kind of unique offering, right? And that could be like customer service, it could be quality, it could be timeliness, it could be all of these, it could be a combination of those things, right? But you're setting yourself apart or differentiating. Now, cost focus and differentiation focus, both of these target a segment of the market, right? So remember, cost leadership and differentiation take on the entire market, but the focuses take on a segment, right? So cost focus carves out a smaller area of that larger market, and they try to provide the lowest cost of a smaller focus area. For example, automobile maintenance or automobile repair is a large market. The cost, and if you are trying to provide the lowest cost in automobile repair, then that is a cost leadership strategy. Now, if you were taking on a cost focused strategy, you would zoom in on something about auto maintenance repair. So maybe it would be oil change, or maybe it would be engine repair, right? So you're not trying to take on the entire market, just a segment of that market. So that company is trying to provide the most competitive cost in that smaller niche area, right? And they're not trying to compete on the larger scale. The differentiation focus is to try to set yourself apart in that larger market by offering a niche product. So the wedding dress boutique, in shops. That's a large market. Like people sell wedding dresses, but maybe a company might say, hey, if you're looking for a pink wedding dress, we have all colors of pink that you would like. And all we sell, let's say that this is the Barbie wedding dress boutique, right? And all we sell are pink dresses. So if you're looking for pink, all different colors, all different sizes of pink, then you come to us, right? That is a differentiation focus. They're not just selling wedding dresses. They are selling pink wedding dresses, which is something that is completely different. Okay. So cost leadership and differentiation, larger market. Cost focus, differentiation focus, smaller market. Okay. Any questions about this? Okay, you guys said no questions. We do have some one-liners now. So, have some one-liners. I'm going to describe either the cost leadership strategy, the differentiation strategy, cost focus strategy, or differentiation focus strategy. Okay, and it is your job to tell me which in the comments. Okay, let's look at number 1. A travel agency curates luxury honeymoon trips only for newlyweds over 40. What is the strategy? Okay, let's see what we got here. Okay, most people did choose differentiation focus, and differentiation focus is correct. We are trying to offer a specialized service to a narrow niche. We are trying to curate luxury honeymoon trips to people over 40, newlyweds over 40, right? So if you are a newlywed, but you're 25, we don't want you. We want people who are over 40, right? Don't come over here. We're not doing any trips for you. Okay, next. A clinic offers affordable prenatal care only to low-income rural communities. Okay, y'all quickly said cost focus, and that is correct. It is cost focus. They compete on price, but it is in a narrow, specific market, low-income rural communities. Okay, very good. Y'all are good at these. All right, next. A sneaker brand uses biodegradable materials and partners with local artists for every design. This is a sneaker brand. Y'all are on it. This one is differentiation, right? So they are trying to stand out across the entire market. All right, good job. And the way that they're trying to stand out is they are going to use biodegradable materials, and they are going to partner with local artists. But this is a sneaker brand, so sneakers are a large market, right? Okay, next. A national grocery chain offers store branded products priced lower than all competitors. Cost leadership. Y'all are on it. Very good. Very good. All right. So they compete, in the broader market, but they are driving down prices across the board. Okay. Y'all are very good with these. I'm very proud of them. Okay. So next, a shipping company guarantees overnight delivery at a lower price than competitors. A shipping company guarantees overnight delivery at, okay, I have some people choosing cost focus, some choosing cost leadership. Okay, so this one is cost leadership because shipping is a broader market, right? But they are trying to win customers by providing fast service at the best price in the broader market, right? So because shipping is just like There's shipping companies everywhere, right? So anybody that's going to ship whatever you're trying to ship, we are going to be the lowest cost in that shipping. Now, if it said all we ship is boats, and you're not going to find anybody that ships boats as lower cost as we do, or all we ship are cows, right? And if you are trying to ship a cow, then we are going to be the ones to ship it for you, and we are going to ship it for you at a lower cost, right? Okay, let's go to our next one. An aircraft repair shop buys parts in larger quantities, allowing for lower cost repair. An aircraft repair shop. I kind of knew that this one was gonna be tough. Okay, I had some people to choose cost leadership. And if you chose cost leadership, very good for you. All right, so this aircraft repair shop is competing with all aircraft repair shops. And how are they competing? With lower costs, right? So they are going to buy their parts in largest quantity so that they can pass the savings on to their customers. Now, let's say that this aircraft repair shop says that we only repair commercial aircraft, or we only repair helicopters, or we only repair small planes, right? This would be a focus. But aircraft repair is a larger market, right? Just like automobile repair is a market. Bike repair is a market. Lamp repair probably is maybe a market. I don't know, right? But aircraft repair is a large market. And in this large market, they are trying to offer the lowest cost in that market. Okay. I had a lot of people choose cost focus, and I'm trying to think of why we got off track with that one. Then I had some differentiation focus as well. So maybe somebody can tell me, and I can speak more specifically to what the challenges are with that one. So I'll give it like 5 seconds. Maybe somebody can drop it in the chat. If not, then I'll just assume that I cleared it up. Okay. Yes, it is lower cost. So that's why it's cost leadership. So you're good on that. Oh, you were thinking aircraft repair was a concentrated market. Okay, so yeah, that's the first piece. You have to understand what markets are niche and what markets are what is broad, right? Okay, so I think I nailed down the issue. Probably everybody was thinking aircraft repair was like a smaller market, right? But people have to repair aircrafts, right? Just like people have to repair cars. What they do to repair cars is different from what they do to repair bikes, or what they do to repair, other things to buy. So yes, aircraft repair is a large market. All right, let's keep moving. I feel like we make here. This is taking us to implementation. We're done with the development of the plan. Now we're trying to implement the plan. And sometimes plan implementation requires phases. This is how we have projects at work, right? So the projects are an introduction to the plan in a more manageable way. And some projects are small, some are easier to implement, some are more intricate, some are larger. They take more time for us to implement. But sometimes when you're working on a project at work, you might not know what the broader implementation is. You've probably just been presented a project. And so most of the time projects are a part of a larger implementation of something, right? So I don't think that's much more that we need to talk about with implementation. Implementation is doing something, right? Putting your plan to action. All right. So that is going to bring us to the evaluation of the strategic plan. And some of the tools that we use in the evaluation of the strategic plan are important for HR, because this is what tells us, well, I won't say some of them, all of them are important to HR. Some of them are more important than others, right? Because this is what tells us if the work that we have been doing has made a difference, right? So is what we are doing, is it working for the organization? And one of the first tools are key performance indicators. I use key performance indicators all the time. Like I use them at work. I also use them like in, my business, HR and Prep with Angela. I use KPIs there as well. This is a set of quantifiable measurements that track, engage whether you are on track to reaching your strategic goals. One of the KPIs that I set for HR exam prep with Angela is a 95% pass rate. And so when people start falling, when people report to me and I read out in the survey and people say, no, I didn't pass, or I did pass, right? When it starts to fall below 95%, that's when I go back to the drawing board and I redo, whatever it is that I'm doing. I try to figure out what is making it fall below 95%, what is happening in the content, what is the disconnect, right? So that KPI helps me to ensure that what I'm offering is going to make the difference between pass or fail. You may use it in your organization as well, right? You may have a goal that your manager sets or that you set for yourself on a yearly basis. And by monthly, you may say, each month I am going to have to do X, Y, and Z in order to meet this goal, right? So the next tool we're going to talk about is an audit. And an audit it's a lot like an inspection. It is a systematic approach to examining processes because you want to make sure that the processes are working to achieve the organization's goals. If they are not working, then they are not serving us, right? And so we have to reevaluate. ROI, we kind of touched on that, but it is a metric that examines gains compared to costs. So the ROI means that the organization has actually spent money, right? And now you are examining the return on that money. What has yielded from the money that you spent. So remember your cost benefit analysis, right? That's a way to compare costs and benefits of an action, right? So it measures the benefit of a decision or taking an action minus the cost associated with that action, right? So when we use a cost benefit analysis, we haven't spent any money yet. But when we use the return on investment, we have purchased something. We have spent money. Another tool that we can use for measurement is the balanced scorecard, and it helps in defining the organization's strategy. It defines what's important to the company, like reporting program operations and delivery metrics, right? All of that helps the organization determine how well it's doing and then where it needs to give more attention based on what the organization has set the vision to be. Like, what are the overarching things that they are trying to achieve? So this balanced scorecard will then divide the organization into 4 different areas. And together, those 4 areas represent the whole of the organization, right? So one of the first things we examine is the customer. For example, if customer satisfaction, maybe we look at it and we say, hey, our customer satisfaction is declining. We develop strategies to improve that. If finances are suffering, then we put our focus there. If the processes are not serving the organization, we develop a plan to address those processes. If the workforce is lacking skill, right, and they can't achieve the goals because they don't have the skill that's necessary, then, of course, we address that as necessary. So this balanced scorecard represents the whole of the organization, right? And helps us to know where we need to put our focus. All right, that wraps up HR strategy. We're still in the people book, but we are moving into talent acquisition. So we're going to start with some basics of talent acquisition, which you probably already know, and I'm sure we'll be able to get through talent acquisition before the next break. I do. No, probably not. So we'll start with staffing, right, which is kind of the cornerstone. And staffing is the function of HR that ensures that the organization has the right amount of workers and they have the qualification and skills that is going to be necessary to do the work to meet the organization's strategic goals. And HR professionals have to work with the other business functions so that we can determine our staffing plan. We have to determine the talent that is necessary to carry out the strategy. And then we have to attract that talent. And then we onboard that talent. And that is what is known as talent acquisition. That is, some of the pieces of it. So talent acquisition is a strategic approach to identifying and assessing new employees for the organization. The assessment evaluates the KSAs, which knowledge, skills, attributes, and also the competencies of those candidates. But also, we look for cultural fit as well, right? The culture of the company. If your company is a high-performing culture, then you don't want to have someone there who doesn't work well in a high-performing culture. Because a lot of times high-performing cultures are fast-paced. If your organization is a learning organization, but you're evaluating somebody and they're like, listen, I have all the skills that I'm going to have. I'm not going to be involved in any trainings. I'm not going to be going back to school. I'm not doing any of that, right? So they don't fit the culture of that organization because that is a learning organization, right? So talent acquisition is the process that makes sure all of those things come together. And it has different components that make it most effective. There are three broad activities of talent acquisition. So you have recruitment, you have selection, and then there is hiring. Now, of course, those broader activities are broken down into smaller activities, right? You do have sourcing, you have screening, you have evaluation. We'll touch on some of those things. We won't go in depth about it, but recruitment, selection, and hiring are the activities of talent acquisition. And some of the tools that we use to carry out talent acquisition are job descriptions, we have tests, and then we have interviews. And then when all of these are combined, they translate to an effective hiring strategy, right? And so that's what we are looking for. Recruitment is one of the necessary activities of talent acquisition that we talked about, right? So the cornerstone of recruitment is attraction. HR professionals have to entice candidates. We want them to apply for our jobs. We want to solicit interest for the talent, because if we are looking for that talent, then other people are looking for that same talent, right? So it's very important to us that, we have tools that we can use to entice our talent. The employment brand kind of, it is the company's reputation, right? From a potential employee's perspective, it is, what have I heard about this organization? How popular are they? Have I never heard about this organization? The people I know in my community who work there, how happy are they? How do they talk about their organization, right? Your employee value proposition is the foundation of the employment brand. The value propositions answers, why would I want to work for you? What are you going to offer me? So it lays out the company's offers. It tells us what the culture of the company is. Are we high performing? Are we a learning organization? All of those things. It lays out the engagement strategy, the total compensation. What do we have in terms of growth, promotion, all of those things that tell a candidate why they would want to work for us, right? If the candidate is asking the question, why would I work for you? the EVP should lay it out. This is why, right? So all of these things that make a person who has all of the choices, because we're trying to get the high performers now. So if we have these high performers, right, they have a lot of choices. So we are trying to lay out the things that make these high performers attracted to our organization, right? And that's laid out in our EVP if we're doing it right. The next component of recruiting is the methods that we use for recruiting. And there are two methods that we use to attract our talent. So we have internal methods, and then there are external methods. The internal methods look for talent inside the organization. That talent is identified through job bidding, right? Which is when the employees within the organization compete for a job. The next internal method is employee referrals, right? That's another means of internal talent attraction. It is especially important to try to get referrals from like new hires, because most of the time, if the new hires, they still have connections from their old companies. And now that they are a part of your company, they know what they know what the culture is. They know, like, what kind of talent is going to be necessary. They know whether their coworkers from the old companies, they know whether they are going to fit in there. So they're good. And then most of the time, if you get referrals from people while they it's sad to say, but if you get referrals from people in the first couple of weeks, they haven't been able to find out like the things yet that they don't like about the company. So they are more likely to, give referrals and speak highly of the company because they're still in the honeymoon stage, right? So the earlier you can get those referrals, the better. And that's sad to say. Next is succession planning. And that is a way of developing existing talent for the future roles in our organization, right? So it identifies the new potential leaders or the new key players, and it develops them to take on those key positions so that the business doesn't have any kind of break in their leadership or key roles, right? The next recruiting method is external. So external recruiting is using outside sources to fill the openings in the organization. Obviously, we know the internet has become one of the biggest ones. Social media, job boards, websites, all of those contribute to branding and also to talent attraction, right? Because how we look on social media, how we look on the job boards, what are people saying about us on Glassdoor, what are they saying on LinkedIn, all of those things, it contributes to our organization's brand. If the brand is good, then it helps us to attract people better. Career fairs are also a good way of external recruiting. Usually these are outside events. And when I say outside, I don't mean like outside on your lawn. I mean outside of the organization, which I mean, they can be outside. But when I say outside, I mean outside of us, right? So these are outside events where employers can set up displays. They can give away like branding swag, things to, attract talent, right? So you have the opportunity to speak with the candidates on the spot and sell the company. They can come in contact with leaders of the company there. University recruiting also is similar to job fairs, as it is an outside event, but it's also possible for you with the career fairs. With university recruiting, it is possible for you to build relationships with those universities and actually have them to build the kind of talent you need or build the curriculum that supports the kind of talent you need. So that's really, really good for talent attraction. It's one of the best resources that I see out there, to actually have someone that is constantly feeding you talent and building that talent, specifically for the organization. Joy has a question, and she says, in succession planning, do we talk about job rotation, shared jobs? No, we don't talk about that here. but we will talk about it though. It's just not a part of talent acquisition. Okay, so that brings us to interviews, right? And there are several different kinds of interviews. Interviews are part of our selection process. The first kind of interview that we're going to talk about is unstructured interviews. Unstructured interviews are when the questions are based on the response of the applicant and the response of the interviewer. So the interviewer asks the questions, the applicant responds. Based on that response, the interviewer asks another question, but there is no set line of questioning. It's just more of a back and forth conversation with no end goal, right? But a structured interview does have an end goal, right? The questions are predetermined and the interviewer follows that line of questioning. The structured interviews make it easier for you to evaluate candidates because you can see apple to apples, like how one person answered the question versus how another person answered the question. Doesn't mean you can't ask other questions or follow-up questions, but it does mean that you are going to ask all of the candidates these predetermined questions. So every candidate gets asked the questions that are predetermined so that you can more easily evaluate the candidates that way. A stress interview is when candidates are put under stress that simulate what would happen to them under, like certain real circumstances in the job, right? If it's going to be a job that requires them to multitask, then you will have people, you will maybe have like lots of interruptions. You will ask them to do more than one thing at a time. You may ask them to answer more than one question at a time. It may be rapid fire questioning, right? To simulate the kind of focus they would need in the job, because it would be a job where they would need to multitask. Then you have behavioral interviews. So behavioral interviews ask the candidates to describe a specific circumstance and how they responded in the past, which means you have already had a circumstance where this has happened, and I want you to tell me how you responded to that and what was the outcome. That way it helps the interviewer to determine if that person has the skills or displayed the skills that they would like to see displayed in the role that they're being evaluated for. This is different from the competency-based interview, because the competency-based interview asks the person being interviewed to tell them how they would respond, not how they have responded, which is you've already done this in the past. Tell me what was the response, what was the outcome. But no, competency puts them on the spot and tells them, if this were to happen, walk me through what you would do if this would happen. So it may not be in a circumstance where this has ever happened to you, and they actually try to recreate a circumstance where it has never happened. Like it is something that is not likely to have happened. But the goal is to evaluate whether or not the candidate has the competency to respond to the situation. And then there is a panel interview. A panel interview is when there are multiple candidates being interviewed, or there are multiple interviewers. Multiple candidates can make a panel. Usually that's not the one that we're looking for. Usually when we think panel interview, it is multiple interviewers, right? You have more than one person. SHRM leans towards multiple interviews, right? That's their definition for it. I know sometimes in some material, it might say multiple candidates, but for the SHRM exam, you need to think multiple interviewers, right, as a panel. All right, and I do believe we will get through talent acquisition after all. Okay, so this is the last piece, right? It is the validity and reliability of our testing. As a part of the pre-employment process, employers a lot of times use pre-employment assessments. The most important factor in these tests is the validity and the reliability of the test. So reliability is the extent to which the test produces consistent results. And the validity is the extent to which the test measures what it's supposed to measure, right? So reliability means that whomever administers the exam, no matter how many times it's administered, you are going to get similar results every time. And validity means that the test the test that is being given is an accurate predictor of on the job success, right? So if you ask a receptionist to lift 100 pounds, right, that is not likely a valid test because that is not the normal job of a receptionist, right? But if you have a receptionist that's going to normally, as a course of their job, lift 100 pounds, then this could be you know maybe it is a valid test, right? But not likely. Okay, guys, it is 2:45. It's time for the next break. So I'm going to let you guys go, and we will see you at 3 p.m. Is everybody back? Or are some people back? I know we still have a minute. Okay, so we have some people back. I've seen some people come and go. So, if you've been here from for the long haul, then good for you. Okay, so how is everybody feeling after the second part? We have two more parts here. And unfortunately, it does look like we're like 30 minutes behind. I was doing good in the beginning, but now it seems like I'm like 30 minutes behind. Okay, so I'm going to start speeding things up. Because you guys don't have a lot of questions so far anyway, so that's good. So, have everybody been, yeah, it seems like everybody says they're doing good, right? So we can jump back in it then. Let's go ahead and get started again. So unfortunately, I drank my water and this time I forgot to bring more. So this is going to be, oh boy, I forgot to get water. Okay, so actually, if I could take 1 minute just to run and get a bottle, because I don't want to mess things up and start talking crazy. So let me just give me 1 second. So sorry, guys. I went as fast as I could. I'm so sorry about the delay. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump back in. We have covered this. We are moving into employee engagement. All right, very good. We are still in the people book, just moving forward. All right, so we're winding down. Employee engagement is important. Right? If you're in HR, this is one of the things you probably are assessing all of the time, because when employees are engaged at work, they don't come to just do their work and to just go home, get their paychecks and not worry about what's happening, right, at their jobs. They are actively looking for ways to advance the organization. So that means there is a level of commitment that the employee feels toward the workplace. And that is very important to the organization's productivity, eventually the organization's competitive advantage, right? And whether or not they are going to be able to cover more market share and whether they're going to be more profitable. So it's super important. A highly engaged workplace creates the right conditions for employees to be comfortable and for them to be their best. If you have high levels of engagement, it leads to motivated employees, and highly engaged employees also leads to higher productivity, right? So it's very, very important. Here on this chart, it shows you the outcome of different levels of engagement and different levels of well-being, right? So engagement is just actually how committed the employees are, but well-being is how safe the employees feel, right, within the workplace. And safety comes from a variety, of course, their physical safety, but how safe do they feel in their job stability? What about their salary, right? Does the salary meet their needs, right? So if you have a high level of engagement, which means people are committed and they also feel safe, like the money, everything is right, the PTO is right, everything, then you will have productive, motivated employees. If you have a high level of motivation, but a low level of well-being, right? They don't feel safe, but they are highly engaged, right? You will have a productive workforce, but they are likely to leave in search for safety. If you have low levels of engagement, but you have a high level of well-being, right? So they are not committed, but hey, I'm making a lot of money here, right? So they're not motivated. They're not going to be looking for ways to advance your organization, but they will stay because why not? The money's here, that work is easy. I may as well be here. But then if you have low levels of engagement, plus you have low levels of well-being, then you have low morale, you have no contribution, right? And you don't have employees who are going to stay in your organization or meaningfully contribute to it. There have been 3 components of engagement identified. The first one is trait. Trait behavior is an innate drive to be involved, and it is the innate drive to be inquisitive. And so therefore, that person is predispositioned to be engaged. Then you have state engagement, which is shaped by the organization and by the culture and by the behaviors of the leaders in the organization, right? So this kind of behavior is impacted. It can be impacted by like incidents or circumstances that are happening within the organization. And then you will have behavioral engagement. And this is demonstrated by the employee's drive to do well in their roles, right? So the drive leads to a high performing employee, and behavioral engagement is influenced by both trait and state engagement. I don't know why there's a G here, but it should be a T. State engagement, right? So the person being naturally predispositioned, plus having the right circumstances at work, which is the state, makes it easier for it to be shown in their behavior, right? It is demonstrated in their behavior. They are taking on the new projects. They are driven to look for more efficient and better ways of doing things, right? Because the conditions are right. There are 2 tools that we use to evaluate employee engagement. We have surveys, and then there are state interviews. Okay, so the surveys these are questionnaires that get employee feedback. And there are 2 kinds. We use the opinion survey and then the engagement survey. So the opinion gets views on policies or specific issues, and your engagement survey assesses employee morale and the general satisfaction of the employees. We also use state interviews. State interviews help the organization to determine why employees remain in the organization, right? So once we understand why they are staying, we can increase those things and we can add more of that, right? Because these are more proactive. They are better than the exit interviews because you are catching the employees while they are still embedded in the organization, right? So remember, opinion surveys, specific issues, engagement surveys, employee satisfaction, commitment, and morale. State interviews are kind of a little bit easier for us to understand. So what I've done here is included one-liners that either describe an opinion or an engagement survey. It's important for you to know the difference between these, mostly just because I see so many people confusing these, right? So let's go through some one-liners here, and I want you to tell me which kind of survey should be used. The choices are opinion or engagement. We're not evaluating state interviews in this one, okay? So let's look at number 1. HR wants to know if employees understand a newly introduced compensation structure. Oh, you guys were quick on the draw. It is opinion, and everybody's chosen opinion. So very good. Next, feedback shows that some employees find their roles too transactional. Okay, very good. Everybody chose engagement. You guys are on a roll. Okay, next. HR is concerned that managers might be weaponizing corrective action forms. Imagine that. Okay, opinion. Very good. Overwhelming. Okay, you guys are on a roll. And the final one. Organizational leaders would like to know how many employees would recommend employment to family or friends. Okay, y'all just don't know how proud I am. I don't think I have ever had a class to get the one-liners right so overwhelmingly. So that's very good. Right. Makes me feel like I'm doing things right here. Right. We're going to go on to learning and development since we don't need to talk more. The ADDIE model is a learning and development tool. Right. So the ADDIE model provides the framework that instructors and course writers use when they're designing a learning platform or they are designing a course. And there are 5 steps in that framework, right? So first, analysis, then there is design, development, implementation, and then evaluation. Okay, so I'm going to break down. I'm trying to see if there's a question. So much. Thank you. Okay, that's not a question. Okay, thank you. Very good, Joy. I'm glad. Okay, so let's start with analysis. When you're performing an analysis, you're trying to determine, like, what is it? What should your learning or what should your coursework contain? The first thing you need to do is figure out what needs to be learned. Right? What is the need? What does this coursework need to address? In order to do that, you go through the needs assessment process. The first step in the needs assessment is the organization analysis, right? Which is making sure that the training that you are considering is going to benefit the organization. This can be done by surveys. You can do interviews, focus groups, observations, right? There are a lot of different ways to get the information, but that's the first step. Second thing is to identify who is the person in need of the training. That is your person analysis. Once you identify the person, that person who is underperforming or that person who needs to advance their skills, then you need to perform a gap analysis. You're trying to figure out what needs to be learned by that person. So the gap is the difference between what the person knows and what they should know. And then you determine that gap analysis by performing your task analysis. Your task analysis helps you to determine, what is the knowledge, what is the skills, what are the activities of this job. And if you know what those things are, then you can determine which of those skills is missing from the person, and you have your gap analysis at that point. Next is the design of the training plan. So this should reflect the data that you found out in the analysis phase. The information from your analysis is used to decide what this coursework needs to contain, what it needs to address, how it needs to be delivered, right? Should it be kinesthetic? Should it be auditory? Should it be visual, right? And also where it should take place. Every training effort needs to start by identifying what the training will accomplish, which is identified like as the learning objectives, right? So this is where Bloom's taxonomy pyramid should be applied. And you see Bloom's taxonomy pyramid is right here on your screen. Bloom's taxonomy pyramid, it attempts to classify the learning stages from remembering facts to creating new ideas, right? Based on that acquired knowledge. The idea of Bloom's taxonomy is that learning is a consecutive process. And before applying a concept in real life, we first have to understand it, right? First, we need to have knowledge of it. Then we need to understand it. Then we can apply it for understanding. Before we understand it, we have to remember the key facts that are related to it. Initially, Bloom's taxonomy was described as a framework, right? So it looked a little different. It looked kind of like the the representation of the Sherm Basque, right? That's how it looked at first. But as it started to evolve, we started to understand it now as a pyramid, which means that every one of these levels build upon each other. So you have to reach a point of knowledge before you can understand. You have to be able to apply before you can analyze anything. You know, it just continues to go up there. So the basis of the pyramid is knowledge. That is the first level of learning. Then there's comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and then there is evaluation. So each level above builds on the one below. So you can only move up this pyramid one step at a time. You have to know, then you can understand, then you can apply, then you can, it keeps going up the pyramid that way. The development phase is where the construction begins, right? So if I always advise to think about the ADDIE model in terms of building a house, right? So analysis is where you go into the bank, you give them your information, they do the research, they decide if they can extend a loan to you. Design is the blueprint of your house. And then development is where they start to actually build your house, right? So development is the phase where the learning approaches are identified. So you either have passive or participatory learning approaches. Your passive activities are the things that learners can participate in on their own, right? So things like podcasts or webinars. Participatory activities are the learning activities that learners have to interact with. So these are like exercises or role play, simulations or round robins, right? So, there are more of these. I do have them in your notes, but we're not going to go in depth about them here because they're not as important, right? But I did include them in your notes. Next is implementation. And implementation is the phase where the keys are delivered to the homeowner, right? So in our case, what we're thinking about is training. This is when the training is actually handed over to the end user of the training. This is usually done by pilot testing. So pilot programs deliver the entire training, but delivers it in a controlled environment so that if there are any flaws or if there are any kinks, we can adjust those things before we give it to, a number of people. We're not just, we're giving it to in a controlled environment, usually to just a few people, and then we can make adjustments as necessary. Okay, the final step in the ADDIE framework is evaluation, right? And the Kirkpatrick model is probably the best known model for analyzing and evaluating the results of a training in an educational program. The Kirkpatrick model bases training on 4 levels. The first level is reaction, and reaction gathers how the user feels about the training, right? It is the satisfaction that the users feel. Just basically, do they like it, right? This is the survey, actually. I'm going to give you a plug here. So this is the survey that I'm going to send out after the Cram class. So it's going to be based on Kirkpatrick's training model. So the first thing it is going to ask you is how you feel about the training. Like, did you like it or not? And you guys can be like, oh, it was just too long. It took all my day. Sucked. I didn't like it. The second one is learning. Learning tells you if the people participating understood the training, right? So whether or not the user's knowledge increased. That would be the second question. Did you learn something, right? Third is behavior. Did you go back and do things differently, right? So based on what you learned, are you now answering the practice questions in a different way because you have new knowledge, right? And then finally would be results, right? So it measures if the training made an impact, right? So that would be that would be the final level. All right. Any questions about Kirkpatrick? Because we're going to move on to some other training frameworks. I'm going a little faster, so I'm trying to make up for some time. Okay. That brings us to the successive approximation model, or SAM. And it is a simpler version of the ADDIE model. The succession model uses feedback to build a working model earlier than you would see it built in the ADDIE model, right? So in the ADDIE model, it's more linear. The SAM is triangular, but within it, it is also, I want to say, like circular as well, right? Because all of these two phases are iterative, right? Which means they can go back and forth in a circle, right? So, but let's talk about the SAM model. So the first phase of SAM is preparation. In this phase, you gather all the information you need, and then you brainstorm about the prototype of that training project, right? Anybody who has an interest in the training product, mentors, advisors, students, everybody, you can get them involved. Then in that second phase, you design the prototype. So that eventually you're going to be delivering that prototype to the people that were interested, right? To those mentors, to those colleagues, all the people who had an interest. The idea is that it's easier to give feedback about a real existing product rather than an idea, right? So this is the iterative design phase. The iterative development phase is when the prototype is built out or and it's implemented, right? So after using it, then you can identify like, no, this one has a bug, and we can send it back. So here we can go back and forth between these phases as much as necessary. Action mapping is another instructional design method, and it's meant to simplify the design process by focusing on a measurable goal for training and building activities and goals around those goals, right? So you have an action map here on your screen. Hopefully you can see it and it's not small for you. So the action map is different because it starts with the goal, right? Rather than analysis or anything, we start with our goal, right? What are we trying to accomplish? Let's say our goal is to increase revenue by 20%, right? This is something that we can measure. We can determine 20% more of our current state, because we know what our current state is, and 20% more is something different. And then we identify a behavior that is going to lead to that goal. So maybe a behavior is every salesperson in our company has to bring in 2 new clients. Now you want to ask, how are they going to do that? There needs to be some kind of practice activity for that. So maybe that activity may be they have to attend how to close the deal training, right, every 2 weeks. Then we need the essential information for that activity, right? So how is that training going to happen? What does success look like? And so using that activity, you can build some kind of engaging training, but it starts here in the middle, right, with our goal. And then we work our way out for how that goal can be best accomplished. Okay. All right. Let's move on to total rewards. Good news. We are wrapping up the People book, and we are going to be moving into organization. I know you guys are excited. Organization is our favorite. Okay. Total rewards. So total rewards includes the compensation, the well-being, benefits, recognition, all of the things that lead to optimal employee performance. Your total rewards program should be strategic, and it should be executed to support the organization's strategy, right? So benefits are an important piece, right? When you think about a total rewards program, it is essential for a competitive compensation package. Employee benefits are any kind of tangible or intangible compensation given to employees apart from their base wages or their base salaries. So benefits are, like they are an employee engagement and retention strategy. They support talent attraction. Employees, this is a way for us to make sure that high performing employees feel appreciated without having to extend them, a high pay raise, right? Maybe we can't afford to extend them a high pay raise, but we can afford to give them more benefits, which tells them, yes, we do see and we appreciate what you're doing, even if we don't have more money to give, right? Employee compensation is the payment that is extended to employees in exchange for their labor. Compensation is probably the biggest expense of any organization because it includes like life insurance, vacation and sick days, disability insurance, right? All of those things, life insurance, if the employer covers that life insurance, obviously. Perquisites or perks, right? We probably most often call them perks, but these are extra benefits that some employees get because of the role that they have in the organization. So it could be like a company car, it could be like your company cell phone. In some cases, it might even be, free housing, right? Those perks can be taxable or they can be non-taxable. So taxable perks are things like medical expense reimbursement, or if you do get those free housing accommodations, right? But like the perks, like the snacks that you might get in the break room, those are also perks, but those are not taxable, right? Those are you don't have to report those. Incentives are payments that are given for achievement of a targeted goal. The incentives are meant to motivate the employees to achieve something specific. So the incentives can be paid as a lump sum, or they could be ongoing incentives. It could be weekly or monthly or quarterly, yearly incentives, like however the employer decides to split those up. All right, I want to talk to you some key concepts when it comes to compensation and benefits, right? So these are some things that you need to keep in mind when we're talking compensation. Employees have to be paid for all of the hours that they work. Even if they have not been authorized, like if they sneak in to, and they clock in and they work hours and you find out and say, hey, you weren't even supposed to be here. I told you no overtime. Doesn't matter. They still have to be paid, right? Because it is on the employer to put the barriers in place to prohibit them from being able to work hours outside of the hours that the employer wants them to. So if the employee works those hours, right, they have to be paid. Now, also doesn't mean that they can't be, disciplined for this, but they still have to be paid for it, even if they are disciplined for it. If training is mandatory for employees, then it has to be compensated, right? If it's outside of their normal working hours. Breaks less than 20 minutes have to be compensated, right? So if you allow somebody to take a 15-minute break, you don't need to dock them for that. They need to be paid for that. Employees who are engaged to wait must be compensated while they're on call. Waiting to engaged employees only need to be compensated if they are called in. All right. So the way that I remember these two, right? Think about a person that is engaged. If they are engaged, they are simply waiting to go to the altar. So in this case, they can't date anybody else, right? They are engaged to wait to the wedding day, right? So while they are engaged to wait, the other person is obligated, right? Which means they have to be compensated for. Okay. Now, if you are waiting to be engaged, it means you're not engaged. It means that you are dating. In this case, you're a free agent, right? So you can do whatever you want to do. In the same way, the employees can do whatever they want to do while they are waiting to be engaged. It is their time. They can spend it how they want to. If they are engaged, they can't spend their time how they want to, right? They have to be in a position to be called. They have to be in a certain area so that when the employer calls them, they can be there within a certain time. Now, if I'm waiting to be engaged, and when you engage me, I'm in Arkansas, and I have to say, listen, I'm gonna have to fly back. It's gonna take me a couple hours to get there, right? And because they are free agents during that time, they don't need to be paid. But since you are engaged to wait, I am paying you. So if I call you, you need to be there within the allotted time that we have set. I told you that once I called you, you need to report within 30 minutes. So when I call, I expect you to be there within 30 minutes because I am compensating you to use your time to wait for me. All right. And then, of course, all required travel during normal work hours has to be compensated, right? So if I am flying, as you know, and this is my normal Monday through Friday work day, then you have to pay me for going wherever I am going. Okay. Okay, so those are the key elements to total rewards. We are going to move on to this is her number just in case you need to change. Okay, so we're going to move on to organization. All right, very good. This is for some reason. Let's see. I have a question. It's from Renee. Does an exempt employee have to be paid for mandatory training? I assume you remember. I assume you're speaking like after their work hours, or maybe clear it up. But generally, the answer is no. Okay, so HR is charged with knowing which HR service delivery model or which practices drive the most value for the organization, right? It is our job. It's really the reason we exist is to support the organization's strategy and to align the rest of the organization with the strategy. So the structure that HR adopts should help us to align all of the parts of the organization and ensure that we are working efficiently to achieve the goals. So the structure or the design allows us to offer the service that drives the goals and defines the vision of the organization and also puts the strategic plan in place so that we can accomplish the vision. If a structure is misaligned, it causes gaps in the processes. And sometimes the vision is threatened, right? Because it isn't operating at its most optimal state. That's where, we'll talk about OED in a minute, but this is where OED comes into place. When things are misaligned, then we have to step in with an OED initiative to realign those things, right? And so it's HR's responsibility to make sure that alignment happens, right? Very, very, very important for us. All right, so let's talk about some of HR's roles. In order for us to accomplish all of those things that make our HR strategic, all right, there are 3 roles that we take on: strategic, administrative, and operational. Right. So in our strategic role, this is all of the things that HR professionals do to guide the organization toward the goals, right, and toward the vision. We do that by keeping the strategy in mind and aligning everything we do to the strategy. Now, so remember, the strategy is the roadmap. So that's what we should be trying to follow. It is getting us to where we want to go. So that means that HR professionals should have a hand in the construction of that strategy, right? Because we are the ones, supposedly, as a part of, our HR strategic planning, we are aligning HR with the organization. So defining the activities that are necessary to realize the goals is extremely important. That means first we need to align HR strategy with the organizations. We need to guide the other functions in their alignment with the strategy. That means, of course, we have to know what the organization's goals are and what um, what they've adopted as their competitive advantage. And we have to define the talent needs and the behaviors that support that. Identify threats and opportunities that might impact that strategic goal. The next role that we take on is an operational role, right? So these are all the things centered on performance engagement and the actions that drive the strategy. If the organization's goal is to build, let's say, 100 new facilities, the operational task is the recruiting and understanding the knowledge and the skills that's necessary to do that, then training that talent, then engaging that talent, making sure the organization is compliant and separating those people or separating the actions that don't support the strategy. That's what we do in our operational role. In our administrative role, it is the documentation and the record keeping of the operational activities. A lot of the task in the administrative role is repetitive things that we have to do to support operations. Sometimes it is tedious things that we do, day in and day out. So we do use a lot of technology in our administrative capacity to try to streamline things or to try to organize our data. A lot of the administrative task is the documentation, right, of the operational activities. So, for example, talent recruitment, that's an operational activity. But when we're collecting applications, when we're storing those, when we're dispositioning the candidates, when we're doing background checks, right, these are administrative tasks that support that operational role. So this is where we can use technology, right? It can help us to be more efficient, and where we should use technology, right? We need to be more efficient because sometimes we can let the administrative role overtake us. The more time we're working in this administrative role, the less we're working in our strategic, where we should try to spend most of our time, right? Offering value to the organization. So it's pretty important. All right, now we're going to move on to the different structures of the HR function, right? So how HR structures itself. Traditionally, HR departments have primarily used two structures. So it's either been centralized or decentralized. And the centralizing or decentralizing determines where the decisions, the HR decisions, are being made. In a centralized structure, the HR function is housed in a central location. So you will have a corporate office or a headquarters, and that central location, they are the ones who craft the policies and they determine the practices, and they then hand down those practices to be implemented throughout the entire organization, right? Across all business units. The centralized HR is responsible for the crafting and the implementation across all business units, right? This is good when you need to standardize your processes, when you need to be consistent. You want to make sure what's happening in one business unit is also happening in another business unit. If the organization needs to be more agile, they need to adapt, they need to change, then they may need a decentralized organizational structure, right? A decentralized structure spreads that decision-making authority out to the business units. So the policies, the practices, those decisions are determined by the needs of each business unit, right? So let's say an organization is having high fluctuation. And we already know that it is because of pay. If we're operating in a decentralized structure, we could very quickly do a regional analysis and we can make the changes that are going to make that business unit more competitive, right? That's if we have a decentralized structure. In a centralized structure, that's more difficult, right? Because HR is at the headquarters. So if HR is at the headquarters, then they may not have firsthand knowledge about what's happening at each business. They would have to take time to get people there to do the analysis or whatever they have to do to do the analysis, right? So it'll take a little bit more time. So we'll have to be a little bit more patient with them, right? And then also because it's not also because it's not because in a centralized structure we're trying to standardize things. It is difficult for us to make changes for just one business unit, right? But if we have a decentralized structure, each business unit can do what's necessary to drive business. All right, so this takes us to some alternatives to the centralized and decentralized structure. Now, remember, I told you traditionally we've had centralized and decentralized structure. Now we've come to understand that there has to be some alternatives, right? It's not blanket. We have to have some other ways of existing. The functional structure is one of the alternatives to a centralized structure, right? So in a functional structure, we have a group of specialists who sit at the corporate level. So maybe you have a benefits specialist and you have a training specialist, right? You have a talent acquisition specialist. These people sit at the corporate. But then at the business unit level, you have HRBPs who sit in each business unit. So the specialists at the headquarters will craft the policies, and then the HRBPs at the business unit level will implement the policies, right? So it's a little bit easier. It's a little bit easier that way. So the training specialist might say, hey guys, I am looking at business unit A and they need to have 40% more participation in training. So what we're going to do that is we're going to require one training activity a month for every employee. Somebody from corporate office crafts that policy. The training specialist says we're going to do one training activity a month, right? They get in contact with the HR business partner who sits at the business unit level and says, hey, this is a policy that I've come up with. Now it is the HRBP at the business unit level. It is their job to figure out how to best implement this training requirement, right? Of one training activity per month, right? It's their job to figure out how to implement it because we're here at the corporate and we're just telling you what to do. Now you need to figure out how to do it, right? At your business unit level. All right. That's functional. Next is matrix. The matrix structure is one that creates an overlap in reporting lines, right? So take, for example, an HRBP who reports to the HR manager, but they also report to the plant manager. Or you may have a generalist working on a project who reports to the project manager, but also the functions manager. In the matrix structure, the person who is doing the dual reporting is an HR employee. Right, so if you look at the organizational structure, they belong to HR. They may be reporting to someone different, like in operations. Maybe they're reporting to somebody in operations because they're working on a project with them, but that is a dotted line reporting. Their solid line reporting is to the HR manager, right? Now, business partner is similar. This is a generalist that indirectly reports to HR. So let's say that sales is failing, right? And we know we need sales, because if we don't get more customers, then the whole organization is going to fail. Why is sales failing right now? Well, sales is failing right now because we can't retain sales employees. We don't know if it's our commission. We don't know if it's because the, employee relations issues. We have no idea why sales is failing. What do we do then? Well, we will take an employee, HR person, and we will embed that person in sales, right? This person will be reporting, solid line reporting to sales. And they are responsible for trying to figure out retention strategies for sales. They are going to be responsible for the recruiting strategies for sales, the training and development opportunities for sales, right? This is what this business partner is going to do. Solid line reporting to sales. But because this person is working on HR activities, they have a dotted line reporting to HR, because I'm still working on employee engagement and I'm still doing training and development, right? These are HR activities, even though I am working in the sales unit, right? But in the matrix structure, the person is actually an HR employee. They report to HR, and they may have a dotted line reporting temporarily. Maybe they're working on a project or something, or it could be permanently. Like maybe they are just like the liaison to operations or something, but they are an HR employee, right? And not employees of sales. Okay. Any questions about that? Business partner and matrix are the two hardest ones to understand sometimes. I don't, let's see, decentralized structure. I didn't understand that question, Cheryl. So maybe kind of clear it up for me. Kathy, difference in matrix and business partner. Okay, so the difference is that the matrix reports to HR. They are an HR employee, right? The business partner is not an HR employee, right? Okay. Okay, I'm seeing more questions, so I'm gonna keep it moving. Okay. So our service models now, right? So the HR service models dictate how we deliver service to the organization. So we just talked about our traditional models, centralized and decentralized. We talked about the alternatives, right? We talked about matrix, we talked about business partner, and we talked about functional. And now we're going to talk about our service models, right? The main four service models are shared service. There's the center of excellence, or sometimes it's called the center of expertise, same thing. Then there is the dedicated service model, and then outsourcing. So the shared service and the center of excellence are similar service models. But the reason that they exist, this is what makes them different. They both exist to reduce cost, especially if the organization has like multiple business units, and those business units have many of the same processes. But instead of each business unit having like a separate HR function, they could use a shared service to deliver standardized service to them. It helps to reduce costs. It helps to eliminate redundancy. You don't have 5 separate groups doing the same thing, right? So the shared service takes on tasks that can be standardized. It takes on things like payroll or administrative tasks. Now, the center of excellence also exists to reduce redundancy. The difference is the center of excellence takes on the strategy of processes, right? So once a shared service is up and running, it is running like a well-oiled machine. It is at its most optimal state, right? It starts to move toward not just delivering these standard processes, but they become the subject matter experts. So they've been doing the processes for so long, they know the processes so well, they can then start to devise strategies that create the best practice around those processes. So this center becomes a hub of experts, and they become the consultants, and they deliver the best practice. So now they are a center of excellence. So sometimes those center of excellence, they may evolve from a shared service. And sometimes because they evolve from a shared service, they may still take on some of those administrative practices, right? So they still may have a menu for payroll or for some of those administrative tasks, right? But a shared service will never take on strategic roles. The shared service exists only for non-core support activities. The Center of Excellence exists for best practice and strategy. But because sometimes they evolve from a shared service, they may still take on shared service duties. But the reason the two exist is different, right? The Center of Excellence is for strategy. The shared services is for non-core support, right? But although sometimes a Center of Excellence will do non-core support things, but that is not why it exists, right? That is not the main function of a Center of Expertise. Okay. The next delivery model is the dedicated structure. So a dedicated structure is good when you're servicing several business units, and maybe they all have a different strategy, right? If there's some reason that the business unit needs special attention, maybe they're just starting, they need to have a new footprint or something, and they need a functional unit that is dedicated just to them while they're getting acclimated, right? Basically, it is for any reason that a business unit would need an HR function all to themselves, right? So usually, again, the business units have a different strategy, but they are all being guided by the overarching vision, right? They just have a different strategy of how to get things done. Okay, and then finally, the third party. I don't believe I did not put this on here. I don't know why I did not. Okay, I missed one. So, for some reason, I do not have outsourcing on here, but we do use outsourcing, sometimes co-sourcing for some of our standard work. I guess the best example in my organization, we outsource our open enrollment each year. So every year, instead of the generalist taking time away from what she does on a day-to-day basis, we bring people, we bring in a third party, an outside person for that enrollment period to answer questions and to help with sign up, but they sit inside of our organization, right? So that is what we call co-sourcing. That is a form of outsourcing. But then you can also, just generally outsource your work, which means sending it out to somebody else. They don't come to you, right? You send the work to them. Co-sourcing is when, yes, it is a third party, but you have more control because they are sitting, at your company, right? So, if a company needs to have more control or feels like maybe their employees won't trust a third party or something, so they can have that third party come to them. Okay, so those are all of our HR structural alternatives. All right, so do we have any questions? Okay, I don't see any questions. Very good. Let's keep going then. We are still in organization. We are talking OED now. And OED is an effort to make a change in an organization. Maybe it's because you identify a problem, it requires a change. It could be just that we decide that we want to make some improvement, we want to make the organization better. But the change could be to any part of the organization, right? The reason for making the change is so that the organization remains relevant, so that we respond to drift. We need to be in a position to adapt to what's happening around us, right? So these changes are made through what we call interventions. Interventions can be either proactive or they can be remedial, right? So proactive interventions, this targets the potential for problems. It also allows the organization to make improvements rather than trying to make corrections, right? But a proactive intervention is thinking ahead of what things could solve a problem, and then could cause a problem, and then putting something in place before it becomes a problem, or looking at a process or something in your organization and saying, I know how I can improve that process, right? And doing that to make the organization more efficient. Now, a remedial intervention means that we already have a problem. Something's happening, and this intervention is about correcting the problem that already exists. Now, of course, obviously, we want to be proactive in our interventions, but either way, if we have to make a remedial intervention, we want to step in there. We want to identify what the issue is and then make sure that we can eradicate that so that the organization remains on track, so that our strategic goals aren't threatened in the organization, right? So that's a very, very important, very important. One of the factors that influences an OED intervention is the organization structure, right? Of course, among other things, but the structure has to align with the organization strategy. The organization structure is influenced by the degree of work specialization, the decision-making authority, and the layers of hierarchy is the division of labor in an organization. So if you look on the screen here, the work specialization in this company that buys used cars is, right, they have a 3-degree work specialization. We have an appraiser, we have an estimator, and then we have a salesman. Now, they can make this as broad or as narrow as they want it to be. They may say, appraiser and estimator, y'all are now one person. All we need is an appraiser, estimator, and a salesman. So we don't need you anymore, estimator, because the appraiser can do the job. So you go, right? Or they may say, you salesman, you are a top achiever. We don't need any of these people, right? We are going to get rid of both of those. You can do the appraising, the estimating, and you can sell because you're awesome. Then they may say, oh, estimator, you're getting so much work. We need 2 of you. So now we need a new car estimator. Well, they only buy used cars, so they won't have. So now we need a sports car used car estimator. And we also need a traditional car, a regular car. I don't know much about cars, God. So they can, make it as broad or as narrow as they decide that they want it to be. The decision-making authority is another influence, and it is the power to make the organization's important decisions and to what extent each level of management is extended that power, right? So at each level of the organization, managers have a certain authority, right? They can make decisions within a certain set of parameters. One manager, like one business unit manager, has authority within their business unit, but it does not mean that that authority extends to other business units, right? It is just for their business unit. A line manager has authority within a certain area, but they are not the CEO, so they don't have that kind of authority, right? So the decision-making authority is the extent of authority that every manager has. And next is the layers of hierarchy. So this is the number of levels between the top leaders and the lowest level employees, right? The flatter an organization, the closer the production is to the decision makers. That makes the organization more efficient. If the span of the span of control is too far apart, it doesn't allow for agility, right? So you can't make those quick decisions. If you have a narrow span of control, it's easier to make those decisions. A narrow span of control is also just a good idea for, like, if you have startup companies, or you just have companies that are less formal, right? Or maybe like in their infancy, right? And you need more supervision. The formalization of the organization is the extent to which the organization maintains written rules, written policies. They have procedures, they have job descriptions, right? So formalization focuses on roles and positions rather than the people in those positions, because this is what impacts the structure. It influences like the hierarchical levels, right? And the degree of departmentalization. Formal structures are more uniformed, they are more orderly, right? Less formal